Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis today, we'll be discussing 6 important articles out of the Hindu newspaper. Good morning to all of you. The 6 topics we discussed today are generally interconnected in a way that we have a Israel-Palestine issue. The balancing policy editorial is also related to Israel-Palestine, and the India, Middle East and Europe corridor is also related to this. So the first 3 are basically interconnected, different aspects we will discuss, and thereafter we'll talk about semiconductors and a report which has come through. And last but not the least, 2 sections, very small. We already need to know Operation Ajay is also related to this topic itself, which is the people who are stuck in Israel coming back. And last but not the least, something which we saw previously 2 to 3 months ago, what was the protocol with regards to laptops, how the government has now revised that policy. So 6 topics. There was not a lot in this newspaper generally, but I've picked up the Israel-Palestine section so as to understand the different aspects together. So with this, let's look at the first topic, which is the Israeli warning to Palestinians to leave the northern Gaza sector. For this, I'll come on this slide so that you can also see the basic topography, the basic geography of Israel in that regard. We know that the West Bank and the Gaza Strip are the 2 major hotspots for the Palestinians, and everything else which you see is generally Judaism based, or what we call as Israeli area. Thereafter, we have one major problematic sector with Syria, which is the Golan Heights. We've seen that there has been mobilization on the Lebanon border also, which means that Israel is planning something on this border also, and the Jordan border and the Egyptian border. Jordan border is the most stable for the Israelis. However, Egypt, they already have fought in the 60s, and we've already discussed that the Yom Kippur war in that regard. But this time, the question and the epicenter is this area, which is the Gaza Strip. Now, what Israel has warned and what Israel has said, that from the northern sector where the Gaza city is also there, just to give you an understanding, this is Gaza city, they are asking them to move away from this sector towards the southern strip of Gaza, and they've not touched West Bank as of right now. But the point is, because Hamas used to operate from the Gaza Strip itself, they have now gone into Gaza, and an unprecedented, what we call as infantry-based invasion is going to happen. Now, what is the implication of this? This is what you need to understand. So this is basically the topography. As I said, Golan Heights is one problematic sector with Syria. Thereafter, this border is also disputed with Lebanon, and there's mobilization in this sector also. Over and above that, this is the 2 pockets of the Palestinians, and this border is a little bit stable for the Israelis, but this border again has previously been a problematic zone for the Israelis generally. Now, this means that we know that the Hamas had a full-blown rocket-based, infantry-based terrorist attack on Israel, if you want to call it, because it was unprecedented. The Iron Dome was not able to, in a way, cope up with the 5,000 to 6,000 missiles which were fired. The question remains is, where did the Hamas actually get these many rockets and this much? The level of weaponry, the volume of weaponry is so big, which means that there is some international actor which helped Hamas in that regard. And now there is also an understanding that if something happens with Syria or Lebanon, and with Syria specifically, Russia has also said that that would be unprecedented and there could be consequences for that. Israel is becoming more and more what we call as aggressive in this issue. But when we talk about Hamas, because it was operating from the Gaza Strip itself, the Israelis are arguing that we want to destroy all forms of Hamas-based infrastructure, and the Israelis are arguing that the Hamas has mostly used civilians as a shield against their activities, and this time we are warning everybody to go towards the south of the southern Gaza Strip itself. Hamas, on the other regard, has argued that this psychological warfare is not going to work. It has asked the Palestinians to not move, but close to 1.1 million, which is close to 11 lakh people, have now to move from Gaza city, or what we call as northern Gaza sector, to southern Gaza sector. The UN has argued that this is a major humanitarian crisis in this sector generally, and is unprecedented in that regard, and therefore this is now going to become more than just a Hamas versus Israeli concept. The Palestinians, the people who are actually not responsible for this are going to now suffer. We discussed this previously also, I think on Monday or Tuesday we discussed this aspect that Hamas wanted to do this attack vis-a-vis bringing back the Israeli-Palestinian issue into the foray, into the conception of West Asian politics itself, but at what cost? And the cost is now that the people who are not involved with the Hamas are now basically having to flee their homes to go towards different sectors in order to evade the bombing and the invasion of Israel in that regard. As I said previously also, the most logical solution which Israel could see was to use this as a pretext in order to enter into Gaza. Egypt is arguing that they had already warned Israel about it. However, the Israelis did not give heed to this warning, this intelligence which was coming from the Gaza Strip itself. So there are three aspects here which you need to know, and I would like to link it up with the second and the third article also, that will make more sense to you. First is the aspect of the Israeli warning. They are now basically what we call as air dropping pamphlets into this sector, and these pamphlets are saying that move to the southern sector. Hamas is saying that don't move, and this is now a standoff between Hamas and Israelis in that regard. Hamas action, be it anything, be it about geopolitics, be it about the issue itself, is not justified at any level, because close to 1,200 people have died in Israel because of the Hamas attack itself. Multiple videos, multiple issues, and multiple horrifying images are coming from the Hamas attack itself. And for us, Indians are also stuck. Close to 18,000 Indians are stuck in Israel as of right now. That is why Operation Ajay is there with regards to that. And the second aspect which you need to know is that the Israelis are planning something bigger. And that is why on the Lebanese border, there has been already a journalist dead, and there is smoke and what we call as basic firing also being exchanged on this border. And if the Israelis try to take Golan Heights or try to go towards Syria, that could mushroom this into much bigger, into Russia also getting involved, because Russia is a very good or very important ally of Syria, Assad in that regard. And if they try to push it too much, this could become something bigger than what we call as Israel-Palestine. As we saw in Russia-Ukraine, this could become bigger. EU has already stopped all form of aid to the Palestinians. We as Indians have condemned the actions of the Hamas, and we have not stopped the humanitarian support to the Palestinians, because we understand that the people of Palestine are not responsible for it. It is the Hamas or the terrorist organization Hamas which is responsible for it. We always tend to differentiate between these two, and this we'll talk about in the second article itself. But the point is that now there will be a movement with regards to this becoming bigger than what it is right now. And this is something which you need to note and understand as a UPSC aspirant, that how smaller issues, a very small issue, it's not an international issue, this is an issue which has been there for now close to 50 to 60 years, now it is mushrooming into something bigger. And if you've gone through your world history, if you understand your world history, this is how the First World War also started. I'm not implying that the Third World War is starting, as it is, it's much more complicated, and nuclear power is deterrence in that regard. But this is how, with a small Serbian-Austrian interaction, with how the Sarajevo crisis, things became bigger and bigger, and the certain tendencies which exist as of right now in the world. The point is that this is the reason, or these are smaller points which tend to become bigger and bigger and bigger. And with Russia also talking about Syria, with the Israelis becoming too aggressive or too overconfident in that regard, if they try to go beyond the Gaza Strip, try to go beyond the West Bank, try to go beyond the Hamas, it could actually implicate and make it much more complicated than it is right now. And therefore, we have to make sure, and that is where diplomatic powers come through, that is where Israelis have to be in a way subdued and have to be made to understand that they don't have to make it about taking everything back. So the concept of the greater Israel, wherein they're taking certain parts of Jordan, they're taking certain parts of Egypt, where they're expanding, that should not be the pretext right now. So whilst the Hamas attack was unprecedented, unjustified, horrific, and has no justification ever, what Israel is now doing is cannot use it as a pretext to go for an all-out attack on all its borders. So to mushroom it to Syria and Lebanon would be foolish on the behalf of, or generally on the part of, Israel in that regard. So we have to understand this, and we need to understand the implications, because for us as historians, for you as UPSC aspirants, for students of world history, this is too much, too familiar. It's a deja vu movement in which something starts in a small sector and it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, and world powers start to get involved. Russia-Ukraine was not that a small issue, because Ukraine already had a problematic relationship with NATO, with the West, and Russia always had an eye on Ukraine. This nobody was expecting. Hamas attack was actually a surprise attack, and therefore the Israeli response has to be balanced. And this is what this second article is talking about. So if you understand the implication of this, I'll go to the second article, and then you will understand what is the importance of this, what we call as controlled aggression, which Israel needs to show. So we know that there is now a major Palestinian mass exodus from the northern Gaza sector, because they've been asked to move to the southern sector, because the Israeli military is now planning an invasion of an unprecedented scale in order to take out the Hamas militant sectors itself. Now, the context is already what we know, the brutal and shocking attack which happened, and in turn, in this context, the Israelis are now trying to take the Gaza city itself. There's panic, there's chaos. They already do not have food, water and electricity. No supplies are there. These sectors have already gone dark in that regard. And now close to 1.1 million people, as the UN argues. UN again is turning out to be a useless organization when it comes to mediating these forms of understanding. And when it comes to the P5, they have also not taken a stand over this. Whatever is happening right now, Israel is taking all its decision itself. And the UN, which should give us an understanding of collective security, is not acting the way it should in that regard. So the UN has always done this. It is telling us the humanitarian understanding. It is telling us that there is going to be a major humanitarian issue. But when it comes to world powers, again a lot of confusion. And with Russia making different type of noises, with multiple powers getting involved, with EU coming with the Israelis seeing that most of the EU members, even the US is standing with it right now. So why not go beyond the Gaza sector itself? This would be a foolish move on the behalf of Israel in that sense. And this brings us to the second aspect. Now let me link it up with the second article, which is called the balancing policy. So first is very straightforward, that we understand that Hamas did an unjustifiable, brutal attack on Israel. Now Hamas therefore is fighting for the Palestinians in a way, and what we say and what we argue is that in a way the Hamas does not represent the people of Palestine. They represent their own understanding, their own political ideas, and for us, they are a terrorist organization, and no big, no small. They are a terrorist organization. If you ask an Israeli that does the Hamas actually represent you, it doesn't. There are multiple political parties, there are multiple actors who are working for Palestinian right to their holy land itself. However, when it comes to Palestine, Hamas is a terrorist organization, internationally recognized terrorist organization, and therefore, what Israel has seen right now is what India has been seeing since its birth as an independent country in 1947, which is terrorism. It is unprecedented. But India has also seen it. We've seen it from one neighbor, we've seen it from two neighbors, be it Pakistan or China. The point is that when it comes to terrorism, India has shown a certain type of restraint. And that is very, very important. See, if you are a state, if you are a government, if you are a sovereign nation, you cannot become like the terrorists itself. And this is what India has actually taught everyone, which is that we have always shown restraint. We have always been the bigger player. We've always understood that, for example, the Jaish-e-Mohammed, for example, the Taliban, for example, any terrorist organization in Pakistan, or what is coming from China itself, these terrorist organizations don't represent the people. That the Pakistani people are different, and these terrorist organizations are different, which are related to the ISI, which is related to the army and their agenda. Now, what India has shown, that we have gone through this, we have lost our soldiers, we have lost our civilians, we've lost children, we've lost very, 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 very good officers in this battle with our neighbor in that regard, problematic neighbor in that sense. But we've never gone to the level of becoming like them itself. This is where India has always shown that India is a responsible power. We are a responsible power. We understand the implications of provoking or starting a nuclear war. We understand the implications of destabilizing the South Asian sector. We understand the implications of people versus soldier. We understand the difference between a terrorist and a civilian. We also understand the difference between how we as a nation cannot be obsessed with something which our neighbor is with. So that is why India today is a 3 trillion economy moving towards a 5 trillion economy, and that is why India has reached the Mars, it's reached the moon, and our neighbors, and I don't want to name them because we give them too much space in that regard, our neighbors have not done that, specifically Pakistan, in that sense that they have been obsessed with something, they've destroyed their economy, they've taken too much debt from China, they are on their way to destroying themselves. Their politics is based on assassinating their leaders itself, so it's not that their obsession has taken them anywhere. We are a responsible power. We have always been a responsible power, and in order to make sure that our responsibility shows a certain sense of international restraint and control, Israel also needs to do this right now. This is where these two topics come together. See, India supports both Israel and Palestine. Since 2017 with Benjamin Netanyahu, we've seen that yes, India has moved towards diplomatically closer to Israel when it comes to military technology, when it comes to basic bilateral understanding. That is also in India's interest in that sense, because Israelis have American technology and we want that in that sense. But the point is that we also in a way opposed it when Trump along with the US unilaterally wanted to say that Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. We oppose that. So we have had balanced this perspective wherein we are balancing our relationship with both Israel and Palestine. Now, a very automatic, a very natural response to the Hamas attack would be to say that Palestine is at fault. And this is where we need to understand that it is not the Palestinians who are at fault, it is the Hamas which is at fault. And therefore, if Israel does not show restraint, if it does not show responsibility as a global power, if it starts to act like an insurgent group or a terrorist organization which it is trying to tackle itself, then what is the difference between a state actor, a government, a sovereign nation, and a terrorist organization? And therefore, the more the Israelis start to act like the Hamas itself, which is all-out attack, destroy anything, kill the civilians, Palestinians already 900 have died, 1200 Israelis have died. The point is, this makes India's position problematic. This makes India's breathing space more and more problematic. We are already having a tightrope in which we are trying to walk this line between Israel and Palestine. But if Israel does not understand, this is the point of this article. I'm trying to add my points, but this article is also talking about this point, which is that Israelis have to show restraint. Israel does not need to mushroom it into an all-out attack on all its borders. We have gone through it. We as India would be a very good example of terrorist action, not for one episode. For 9/11, for example, for the Americans and Israelis would say that this is our 9/11. We have seen multiple 9/11s since our inception. We fought a war as soon as we got independence. And we have had a problematic neighbor multiple times trying to push a standard issue. Till today, it tries to destabilize a certain section of our territory. And therefore, we have gone through it. And it would have been very easy for India to actually act like the Pakistanis or the Chinese. However, we have shown that we are not an irresponsible nuclear power. And this is where Israel has to show restraint and show to the world that it is a responsible power when it comes to global order. And killing Palestinians is not the answer to what Hamas has done. Rather, okay, all-out attack, a very surgical strike, if you want to call it, on Hamas territory, on Hamas in what we call as infrastructure is justifiable. Killing the Hamas, destroying the Hamas is understandable. But then going beyond it and then starting a war with Syria, then starting a war with Lebanon, and then trying to take the whole West Bank makes no sense. So yes, we understand the pain of the Israelis, but we also need to understand, they also need to understand that we've gone through this experience previously and we've acted like a responsible power. And therefore, responsibility is something which needs to be reflected from the Israelis. This is the point I'm trying to make. I'm trying to link the two basic first articles up. Because the first says that they've said all out 11 lakh people should move. That will create even more chaos. And that is not the answer. So I hope you understand how these two are connected. Let me read it out to you from the article itself, and then we'll link it up in the end again. So the balancing policy comes through, wherein, see, Israel has to act responsibly in the face of terrorism. This is a very important point. India has also faced terrorist attacks. We feel the pain of the Israelis. We have seen countless children, countless men, countless Jawans, countless soldiers die for our nation because of their obsession. And therefore, the answer to it is not just killing Palestinians. That is not the answer. The Palestinian people are not responsible for Hamas's action. These are two very different things in that sense, and this is what the Israelis have to understand. So for the concern for India is that already, the second concern for India is that we already have close to 18,000 Indians working in Israel, and 85,000 Israelis of Indian origin are also there, coming from Maharashtra, Manipur, Mizoram, Kerala and West Bengal. And we already have Operation Ajay, which is happening to remove the Indians from this conflict zone in that regard. But West Asia should not now become again a major epicenter of war, with Israelis now losing their mind over this. So while we repeatedly condemn the actions of Hamas, we also, as Indians, remind Israel that there's a universal obligation to observe international humanitarian law and global responsibility to fight the menace of terrorism, and long-standing consistent position of Palestine remains for India. But this is a very important point. Global responsibilities. Note these words because this will matter in the examination. Global responsibility and international humanitarian law. We need to tell the Israelis that don't lose your mind over this and make it an all-out war in all sectors. And therefore, India since 1992 has already been walking a very tightrope when it comes to diplomatic ties between Israel and Palestine in that regard. We have had a better relationship with Israel over a period of time when it comes to technology, military procurement, even counter-terrorist cooperation. And the US and Israel have tried to declare even Jerusalem as Israeli capital in 2017, and India voted against it. And therefore, the policy of this basic restraint which India shows needs to go beyond it. Yes, we don't want terrorism. Yes, we condemn terrorism, but indiscriminate bombing and killing of Palestinians is not the answer. This is the point which India is trying to make to Benjamin Netanyahu or to Israel right now. And therefore, yes, no historical grievance can justify Hamas's action. However, a responsible state cannot behave like an insurgent group. And Israel's latest demand to move 1 million people out of Gaza is in a way a very, very problematic policy, and this makes India's balancing policy problematic. So therefore, let me bring the two things together. That is why I've taken 3 topics which come together in a way. First is that 1.1 million Palestinians have been asked to move from the northern Gaza Strip to the southern Gaza Strip. The Gaza city is now going to be bombed, and there is going to be an invasion of Israel in that regard. This is something unprecedented. Israel is justifiably going after the Hamas. Hamas needs to pay for what it has done. However, there needs to be a differentiation between Hamas and the Palestinian people. And therefore, the Palestinian people who do not believe that Hamas represents them should not pay for the price of Hamas. And for India, we have gone through this experience for a very long time. Initially, nobody used to believe that India is going through terrorism. It is only after 9/11 that the US became more and more what we call as cognizant, or even used to acknowledge that there is something called terrorism. India since 1947 has been arguing that Pakistan has been doing something on its border. It is terrorist action, but India has always shown restraint. That is what is our understanding. This is what makes India, India, Pakistan, Pakistan. And in every war, India has shown restraint because we understand the difference between civilians and soldiers. We understand the difference between terrorist organizations and people. And therefore, Israel has to show that it is a global power which is responsible. It has to show a restraint which is important for a sovereign state to do it. And over and above that, there has to be a difference between an insurgent or even a terrorist organization and a sovereign state in that sense. How India has always created it, and that is why India has moved forward both in economic or any other sphere rather than its neighbors who have been obsessed with certain issues. So two issues coming together, which is, yes, terrorist action should be condemned. Yes, Hamas should be attacked. Hamas did something which is unjustifiable. However, for India, it becomes problematic because the more the Israelis become aggressive, the more they go after the Palestinians, the more diplomatically India becomes isolated, wherein it's trying to balance both Palestinian and Israeli angle. Israel is a better partner in that regard, but the point is, it is our responsibility as a country which has gone through this experience multiple times, too many times in that sense, to tell another country which is going through the same type of pain to not overreact. This is a very important point you need to understand. Israel needs to make sure that it does not overreact to this situation. Because if it overreacts to this situation, already Central Asia, West Asia is very, 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 very what we call as a very fragile sector, and over and above that, the peace there is mostly artificial. And therefore, from the Saudi Iran, from the Saudi Iraq, Iran, Syria, Lebanon, and the whole sector already is coming out of the ISIS effect. Now, it should not go into the same type of understanding, because the people who die are the people who die, who don't support Assad, who don't support ISIS, who don't support these regimes. Political power should not be the reason for the death of millions of people. There is no justification of this in any religion, in any understanding, or in any foreign policy, or in any book in that regard. And therefore, we need to make sure that Israel does not make it bigger than what it is. It has the right to go after Hamas, sure, but in that sense, it can't kill 11 lakh Palestinians, because they are not the ones who've done it. It is the Hamas who's done it. This differentiation was blurred during the First and the Second World War. I'm not trying to say this is the beginning of something bigger, but I'm trying to say that we have seen it too many times. And as a UPSC aspirant, as a historian, as a history student, as a person who understands what is happening in the world, who understands politics and generally the larger perspective of what is happening, we need to make sure that this does not become what previously we've seen in Europe in that sense. Nationalism should not become a reason for the death and destruction. We saw 3 crore people die in the First World War, 8 crore people die in the Second World War. Already we've seen close to 5,000 to 6,000 people dead on both sides. Hamas needs to pay, no doubt about that. Terrorist organizations need to pay. That is a total, there's no uncompromising fact about it. However, the Palestinians, 1.1 million, have not done anything. There is a long-term historical grievance between Israelis and Palestinians. We understand that, but that doesn't mean that slaughtering people is the answer. So Israel needs to show, it's not India's limelight right now, it is Israel's center stage. Israel needs to show that it is a responsible global power, and that power is not in the hands of a finicky or even a very impatient, overconfident state. So, two things I've brought in together. I've tried to give an understanding which you can use in the examination, wherein you are giving a balanced perspective. As an IAS officer, as an IFS officer, as the future of India, you need to understand this differentiation, because we tend to forget this in the larger perspective of how we respond to certain things. But every leader in India, every responsible leader, every government has shown one thing. What is common to all of them is restraint and showing to the world that we are different from our neighbor or any terrorist organization in that regard. So with this, let's move to the third thing which is related to it. And the problem is that recently at G20 in New Delhi, we launched along with Saudi Arabia what is called the India, Middle East, European or Europe Economic Corridor, what is called the IMEC. And the problem of IMEC is, if you look at the map, it goes through this sector. It goes through this sector. It starts at Mumbai, and what Nirmala Sitharaman has argued at the G20 finance ministers meet in Marrakesh is that the Israel-Palestine issue is not going to dampen the plans for the India, Middle East, Europe economic corridor. However, it is now to be seen that does it actually have an impact or not. Starting at Mumbai, the point is the UAE sector is okay. Saudi Arabia, this is all what we call as rail link. This sector is all rail link. This is through ship. And then coming to Jordan, till this point, this is okay. It is Haifa and the Israeli sector which has now got destabilized. For India, this corridor is important because it, in a way, does two things. It finds a solution in order to bypass the Suez Canal. It also tries to balance the Belt and Road Initiative of China in that sense, where they're trying to go via the Belt and Road Initiative like this, which is their old Silk Route in that regard. And India is trying to find multiple ways in order to even bypass the long route across Africa. And therefore, this is a very important corridor for India generally. And now, Israel-Palestine issue has complicated Haifa port. And therefore, whilst the finance ministers argued that there will be no change, now what becomes important to us is to understand the modus operandi. That what is this? I'm again repeating with you, this is bound to be seen. This is now to be seen what it actually is going to be materializing on the ground itself. But as of right now, this corridor was signed at the G20 summit in New Delhi very recently. And it is part of the larger program which is called the Global Infrastructure and Investment Partnership, or Partnership for Global Infrastructure Investment, PGII. And this is a very interesting program. This program or this partnership is very interesting because it has two, eastern and northern corridor, which is India to the Arabic Gulf and then Gulf to Europe. But what we are doing is that along with the rail and the sea route, we want electricity cables wherein we can use the thermal power plants in the West Asian sector, a hydrogen pipeline because hydrogen is the fuel of the future, and high-speed data cable which is for internet. So we have created a very elaborate plan to link the Greek sector with India in that regard, and therefore Europe with the Indian sector, bypassing Suez, bypassing other important channels in that sense, bypassing the issues of, for example, Pakistan, Iran and Iraq in that sense. And therefore, Saudi Arabia is a very important partner for us right now. But Israel, which is basically very important to enter into the Mediterranean, is now acting in a certain way. If it becomes too destabilized, if it destabilizes its border with Egypt or with Jordan or with Syria, then this plan can come under jeopardy in that sense. And that is why it is important to understand that IMEC right now is under a little bit of cloud because of this. Now, what is the objective? Objective is transportation network, rail, road and sea route between Middle East, India and Europe. And India has tried multiple configurations. We tried to go via the Chabahar port, via Iran to Europe. We've tried this. We already have this Suez Canal time and tested. We're having the Chennai-Vladivostok sector itself, but then the problem is Russia in that regard. And we are now trying another route, which is through Saudi Arabia, just to balance out what the Belt and Road Initiative or the String of Pearls understanding of China is doing, which is to find multiple ports for which India has a pro policy or multiple economic channels which can be used for India to connect with the EU, which is a very important trade partner for us. So it is about reducing cost, reducing time, transport efficiency, economic unity and generating employment and lower greenhouse gas emissions, because if we save on fuel, we save on carbon emissions, and therefore it is about integrating these three major sectors of the world. But the point is now this is under question. So the first three topics, before we go to this one which is a separate concept itself, the first three topics are connected to each other. How? Because this tells us what Israel is doing right now, which is asking everybody to move to the southern Gaza Strip. Now, the second one talks about how a responsible power needs to interact and argue or respond in these type of situations. And the third one talks about a very important, what we call as partnership, which India is heading. So India has too much at stake here. First, 18,000 Indians are there. Close to 85,000 what we call as Indian origin Israelis are there. Over and above that, India's economic interest is also coming into question. Further, if this area becomes too destabilized, we can also not support Palestine at the same point of time we are supporting Israel. There could be a position in which it is becoming like Ukraine, Russia, but India there had a very interesting way of saying it, that we will align with both. We'll align with the NATO also, we'll align with Russia also. We have an independent foreign policy. India can do it here also, but Israel is much closer to the US, and Israel is much closer to India in that regard. So the problem is that whatever Israel does from here is now going to be very important generally, and therefore they cannot escalate it into much bigger geographical expanse, and with its other neighbors also. Adding Syria, adding Lebanon, and there are multiple reports which are coming. If you've been following the news, if you're following Twitter or X now, if you're following social media, you would see there are multiple mobilizations which are happening on the Lebanese border, on the Syrian border, around Golan Heights and along the Egyptian lines. And this is not something which we expect from Israel, and Israel has to make sure that it does not mushroom it into a much bigger issue of Greater Israel taking everything what is theirs. We already know that it is a problematic zone. It's a fragile piece which exists there. This fragility should not be used or destroyed in that regard, and therefore Israel needs to act in a very responsible way. IMEC is very important for us, and if Haifa port becomes compromised, then India needs to find another way. Already Lebanon is not an answer, Syria is not an answer, Egypt already has Suez Canal, it would not allow a railroad link via the Saudi Arabian sector. So we have to have Israel as a responsible power right now. So I hope that you understand. The last 40 minutes we've discussed this, the importance of Israeli response. It's very easy to say attack Palestine, take everything, but that is not going to be the answer in the long run. Short-term answer is not the long-term answer. It will only create a bigger humanitarian crisis, and the people who are suffering are humans at the end of the day. Palestine, Israel, whatever it may be, the people of Palestine did not sanction what Hamas did. Hamas did it independently, and there's a difference between a Hamas terrorist and a Palestinian. This differentiation Israel needs to keep in its mind. As much as the anger can come through, we have had also multiple points at which we could have acted in a brutal way, but we showed restraint because we are a responsible global power. India should be, in that regard, a very good example of how a country should act in this type of position, because the US also did not do the same. When the 9/11 attack happened, Bush destabilized the whole Iran, Iraq, the whole of West Asia. So they have always acted in a very irrational way. India has never done that. We should be the example for everyone, and India should lead by example, and it is right now. And India needs to, in a way, make Israel understand that there is nothing to be gained by destabilizing this whole sector. So I hope you understand it. I hope that Benjamin Netanyahu understands it. I hope Israel understands it, though they are not listening to us, but somebody gives the word of advice to Israel. Don't be irrational in this moment. So with this, let's take the fourth, a very different type of what we call as discussion, which is semiconductor chips and AI. Now this article is very straightforward. There's been a report, 6 different working groups were working on different aspects of how the artificial intelligence roadmap of India should be created. And here the report has argued that what is most important in semiconductor chip manufacturing in India would be PPP, which is public-private partnership. So public-private partnership is the future. Only when these two come together that AI application can be better. And what is also argued by these reports is because AI is based on very heavy graphics. So GPU clusters, which is graphic processing units, GPU, your phone has it, every computer has it. The GPU cluster unit should also be produced in India so that we have the right technology, we have the right skill set, we have the right set of people who can do the 3 things together, which is GPU manufacturing, AI, and they've also added robotics to it. So AI has multiple applications in India: agriculture, healthcare, education, fintech, security, and governance. Now, robotics is something which has also been identified as a very important space, which could make a lot of this chip manufacturing and even GPU manufacturing competitive, cost effective, and computer vision is very important, because AI can then use these robots to in turn produce better and better chips, which is the future. Semiconductor chips is the future of the world generally. And robotics is a multidisciplinary technology. Range of sectors have to come together. So these reports are now arguing that AI, robotics have to come together along with PPP, which is there needs to be public-private partnership in these two zones, and it is very, very important. So we have to have demonstrating facilities. We have to have the capacity to create a robotics sector itself. People have argued that automation can take away a lot of jobs, but what the ministers argued that computer vision and efficiency can benefit this sector. More skilled jobs will be created, and this can be the way India can move forward in this sector generally. So let's try to understand all of this before we move to the prelims bytes section. First, second and third article were about Israel. Responsible power, Hamas action, what are they doing right now, and how India is right now walking a very, very, very difficult tightrope as of right now. Thereafter, we've done the fourth article, which generally talks about the aspect related to what we call as robotics, semiconductor chip manufacturing, GPU manufacturing, vis-a-vis how PPP, public-private partnership, needs to come together. We need to see how that materializes. But as of right now, that is the emphasis of the report which is there. And now we move to the prelims bytes section. Here, the emphasis is totally different. The understanding is different, and we have to just understand the basic standard points, and then we'll take the mains question. The paper generally does not have text and context today. Saturday, Sunday paper does not have text and context. Therefore, the editorials were not geared towards UPSC, what we call as preparation. So therefore, I've taken up multiple topics and tried to link them together. So, first is Operation Ajay. This has been in the news again. 212 citizens from Israel have taken the first flight from Israel to come to India. These are Indian citizens who were working in Israel, studying in Israel, and the point is, it is right now on first come first service basis. Whoever has the chance of registering themselves with the embassy can come to India. And the most important aspect here would be the fact that the expatriates, or what we call as Indian citizens in Israel, they are giving us very horrific stories. They've seen too much. There has been a lot of chaos in this sector, and Operation Ajay is now something which you need to know generally for your preparation, because in the prelims examination you can get a very simple straightforward question with regards to Operation Ajay, that what is Operation Ajay and what is the purpose of that in that regard, and you need to understand it. So 18,000 Indians have been airlifted, and therefore first come first service basis they are picking up the different citizens who have opted for it. It is a voluntary argument. Hereafter we have the second, which is laptops. Now we know this was a very interesting thing which was in the news, which is that just in March, April, there was a news that the government is planning to ban import of laptops, monitors and tablets. However, there has been a clarification which has come through, which is that from November 1, there was an announcement that all of these would go into licensing regimes. There needs to be a license to import it. Now, what the Commerce Secretary has argued, that we are not restricting the imports, we will only monitor it. That is the only thing. So these are two very different things, which is monitoring and restricting. Vis-a-vis the first aspect, what the government had initially argued was that laptop shipments will be restricted. That will be controlled. Here, it is only about monitoring, which is basic monitoring will be done, nothing to do with restrictions as such, and therefore, this is better than what the government had initially planned for. So this may be the government changing its course when it comes to its policy, but it is important to understand that they've changed their understanding in that regard. So with this, we can take the mains questions, but let me bring everything together. 6 articles we've done, 3 connected to each other: Israel, responsible power, aspect related to Hamas action, how they've asked the people to move to the southern Gaza Strip itself, and India's diplomatic issue and IMEC getting entangled with this issue generally. Second was the semiconductor, the public-private partnership. We will see further articles coming about this as we go on further. And thereafter, two small points, Operation Ajay and not understand this, not import ban, but monitoring of imports. These are two very different things for laptops and multiple electronic devices coming from different countries. With this, let's look at the mains question. The Israel-Palestine escalation has made India's policy towards this region problematic. Discuss. This is basically linked to how India has to now balance both Palestine and Israel, and how the IMEC itself gets entangled with this issue. And what we have right now shown is both, that we have engaged with Israel also, we've engaged with Palestine also. Now it will become problematic to do it if Israel becomes more and more aggressive. Second is a GS paper 3 type question. Robotics and AI are the gateway to India's future. Comment. This is a very generic type question, but this question can be written better and better as we talk about this issue generally. So with this, I would like to end this session. I will see you tomorrow, but because it is Sunday, again we'll find multiple topics which may be irrelevant. I'll try to bring in the relevant elements of the newspaper with you tomorrow also. From tomorrow and Monday, both days, it is me. Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye. See you.